Call to order. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you being here. Chris?
Welcome. Hi, Chris.
Chris, you maybe like to say in the public audience?
No, fine for now.
Moving on to board and administrative reports. Katie Galt, our student representative.
Yes, just a second.
Would you like me to move on and come back to you?
No, I got it. So, all elementary schools have had their cultural enrichment assembly called Toying with Science, and visits from the fire department. And they've all also been practicing lockdown drills, the safety procedures. In middle school, students have started celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month by reading weekly quotes by famous Hispanic figures and playing trivia games to celebrate and learn more about the long and important presence of Hispanic and Latino Americans. And at the high school, the SATs were held last Saturday, and the PSATs is being administered tomorrow for the 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. All seniors visit college to work on their common application. And we also had a surprise visit from the fire department today.
Thank you very much. Tom?
Thank you.
Jen?
Nothing, just a reminder that the registration is still ongoing for the CAPS convention in November 15, 16, 17, 16, 17, 18. So I will bring forward send you more information about that. It's going to be a very great conference issue. That's some very nice speakers and presenters and things. So more to come on that.
Thank you. Nothing this evening.
Just one item that I know the board is aware, but want to start to get word out that there's going to be a pretty significant event on October 24th, which is a half-day professional development for our school district. And at the high school, the town and emergency services has been planning a simulation involving an active threat at Simsbury High School. So what it's going to be is we'll send the students home at 11:15. Some students in the police cadets and the fire cadets are going to participate in the exercise, but other students will be asked to leave the campus. Our teachers will participate. It's similar to the action where they tested, you'll remember, when they shut down the Hartford Insurance and they did a major test there. It's going to be mostly a coordination between police, fire, ambulance in a simulated event, but our teachers will participate and we'll be testing some of our procedures in there, and it's just Burke and I have been at a few planning meetings, and it is a really well coordinated effort to try to get some important training in for emergency services. So you'll be seeing, there'll be signs going up around town letting people know that this is going to be happening, so that when it does happen, people will be aware that it is a simulation. So you'll be hearing a lot more about it in the next 2 weeks, and we'll give you, our next board meeting is the day before it happens, and we're going to give you a little more detail at that time.
Neil, how do they test the response time of the police and the fire if they know about it? Do they still kind of go on their day and then just get called whenever it is?
Yeah, well, that's a challenge. They will kind of time it accordingly. There's a plan because school resource officers are on site already. That's kind of how the simulation is going to unfold, and then it would be a few minutes before. So they have it there. One of the things in the planning meetings, they're incredibly well coordinated.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Excellent. Erin?
So I do have one follow-up. At the last meeting, we spoke about the school start time study that we're working on. I did have the opportunity to talk to Hanover Research Design on Friday. It's the same company that we used when we did our survey last year, and they're willing to work with us again this year, gathering information regarding our one-page summary of our research that we did last year on the leadership team. They hope to gather all of this, have a draft in November, so that we can administer the survey just after Thanksgiving. So
Great.
keep you posted on that.
Thank you. Burke?
Yes, just wanted to update the board that since its last meeting, we did receive 8 responses to the request for proposals for the school facilities master plan and reconfiguration study. So now we're going to have some help to look at those submissions, and then we'll be looking to set up some interviews with some of those firms, and then be reporting back once we've chosen a firm, and then advise the board of the schedule after that. So that'll be there'll be a scheduled sort of interim update for the board once they've gotten started, and that's part of the plan for your upcoming year.
Thanks, great.
One thing, Aaron and I had an opportunity to meet today with Richard Lemons from the Center for School Change for a couple hours. Richard is going to be the facilitator for our meeting next week when we come together to kick off our strategic planning. So I think we have a good evening planned. Certainly, he's a kind of a dynamic individual, and I think it'll be a really engaging evening for us.
Great. Excellent. Moving on, approval of the minutes of September 25th meeting.
Move to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Tom. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll abstain.
Thank you. Moving on to a gift from Latimer Lane School.
Okay, you may recall at your last meeting, there was a generous donation from the Latimer PTO regarding a water fountain, and now this is a new gift proposal, and it's for on the primary school playground having an additional basketball hoop, and the cost is $2,720 to install and purchase, so we're asking the board's acceptance of that gift.
Great. Very nice. Thank them very much.
I'll move to accept the gift.
Thank you very much. Todd, second?
Second.
Anyone have anything they want to add or question? All-
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks is nice.
A lot. Many times.
To the PTOs yet again.
Again.
And again.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Culture enrichment gift.
So the board has been, in the past years, we've done 3 of these donations per year. We decided, why not put it into one donation, since they have committed, the PTOs from all 5 K-6 schools have committed to this level of funding. So we heard earlier that there was Toying with Science programs. There's also going to be Beethoven String and Roots of American Music. So we would ask for acceptance of the total of up to $15,855 be accepted from the cultural enrichment.
A question about that? Yeah. Could you just, if we have the information here, just a little more information about those 3 programs. What does it mean, Toying with Science and the Beethoven String Quartet? Is this going to be a study of the Beethoven quartets? Or
No, it's a presentation that they do to each of the elementary schools. What happens is that the representatives that oversee the chairs of this committee come to our elementary principal meeting in the springtime. They do due diligent work in going out and looking at these in other schools and then picking them. And they do presentations at each school. They do a primary and then a secondary.
The committee's made up of members of each school PTO.
I see.
And it comes together as the Cultural Enrichment Committee, and it was formed many, many years ago, and and they search out specific things that maybe some of the specials teachers might want a little more information on, or we'd like to do something here and there, and they try to make it a balanced presentation, but it's an additional programming for the school district, and they've been doing it for many years, and it's really spectacular.
And they do 2 or 3 a year.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm especially glad to see something like a presentation on the Beethoven String Quartets, because that's really, really famous music, and it's just great to know that we're still trying to keep our young people aware of and interested in the classics.
Right. So we can certainly get you the dates. You can always attend one of them at one of the
I would
schools
love
if you're
to see that.
interested.
It's really
So we
fun
can
to
do
watch,
that.
it's really fun to watch these presentations
Yeah.
with the students. It's really great interaction.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for that information.
On that note,
I would move to approve.
thank you. Second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you once again. Again, a PTO-sponsored addition to our curriculum, and it's really wonderful.
Really, very, yep.
Okay, so, information and reports. We get to our enrollment
We do,
meeting.
yes.
All
Mr.
right.
Sullivan.
So I get the floor tonight to present the really important information around our October 1st enrollment. As the board knows, October 1st is kind of the state mandated marker in time when you count your students. And we also have tied into this report each year the class size notion, because that's been a important priority of this board to make sure that we're monitoring class sizes. So I have a lot of information, a lot of data slides to show you. But I've also been reminded that by more than a few people that there is a Red Sox-Yankee playoff game tonight. So I am going to give you a lot of information in a robust but efficient format.
We really appreciate that, Mr. Sullivan, thank you.
Hopefully, you will find this as interesting as I do. So we start, when you see the ones that refer to a table at the top of the slide, the table is referring back to the exhibit that you received as board members. So you'll see that we skip around a little bit, so the table is always referring back to your exhibit. So the first one is, we start by looking at actual population and from a year ago. So the key number in this presentation is going to be the one at the bottom of the first column. Our enrollment number for October 1, and the one that we'll be using in all of our budget documents and everything else, is 4,018. That's where we landed on October 1st. 3 up from when I gave you a opening weekend report. It was 4,015 a month ago. That is down 21 students from a year ago. And as you can see, the modest increases in K-6 and at the high school of 13 and 14 students respectively are offset by the pretty significant decrease of 48 students at Henry James, which is solely a large 8th grade cohort going up to the high school, and a smaller 6th grade cohort coming in. So down 21 students, but as you'll see, down overall, but above projections when I get to that slide in a moment. Next, we'll look at each of the individual elementary schools and where they are actual to actual. And you can see the one that has the most significant difference, it was Tooten Hills this year, is the school that saw 18 more students. One of the things we're going to talk about later in the report is all of the new developments and apartment complex and real estate in town. The only place where none of that is in the Tooten Hills district. And yet that's the school that saw the more significant increase. It's due in large part to Tooten Hills having the largest kindergarten cohort it has had in a while, with 60 students in kindergarten at Tooten Hills School, which is reflected again in when we get to the projections. So 1,989 actual students compared to 1,976 a year ago, and I will get back to that in a moment because it's a significant marker that number went up. Now I'm going to shift from actual enrollment compared to actual enrollment, and we're going to talk about what our projected enrollment was compared to actual enrollment. Again, in this slide, I'm going to highlight Tooten Hills School, because you can see the projection for Tooten Hills was only 343 students, and yet we got 373 students. In particular, you should know that the projections from NASDAQ are always iffiest about kindergarten. The projection for Tooten Hills Kindergarten that we got was 39 students, and we got 60. So much of that difference, you can see, comes from kindergarten. Despite the large population drop at Henry James, the projection was right on. It was only 4 students off, and a modest increase at the high school level. So while we were down 21 students actual to actual, our projections, we actually landed 22 more students than NASDAQ had projected. This one is a grade level look at projections to actual, and you can see 31 in kindergarten more than had projected. So we had a very small projection of 237 students. That's all based on the 5-year-ago birth rate, and they do a multiplier based on the history in town of every 100 births results in 118 kindergartners 5 years later. Or they have a number, and that number didn't work this year based on historical trends.
Do you know whether or not other school districts are seeing that same thing happening at the kindergarten level or no?
I don't know whether that's true or not.
It's kind of strange.
Yeah, I could certainly call around to the valley.
I do know some like districts are seeing numbers over projection, similar to
Yeah.
what we are overall.
Overall.
So what I can tell you is that what happened as a result of kindergarten projections that were not accurate, our budget, our post-budget additions to FTE were all kindergarten teachers. We had added a kindergarten teacher to Tooten Hills, we added a kindergarten teacher to Squadron Line post-budget, and we added a kindergarten teacher to Central School post-budget. So that number has an impact. I mean, it makes a difference. The other two that I don't have great explanations about but are interesting to note, you don't usually see significant drops of students below projections but in fourth grade, we happen to be down 13 students from projected. And in sixth grade, that projection of 328 is resulted in 316 sixth graders. I'm keeping a close eye on that because that's the group that's now going to move into seventh grade. And we have been talking about, well, there's one more class with about 325 students. That may not be the case anymore when we get to seventh grade next year. So that's really something to pay attention to. At least I'm excited to pay attention to it. I hope you are too. This is kind of giving NESDEC's, this is the scorecard. How is NESDEC doing in making these projections? Are we, in fact, reliably getting good projections from NESDEC? You can see if you go back to the beginning of the decade at the bottom of the slide, we were actually yielding fewer students than they were projecting. And for about 5 years in a row there, you can see pretty significantly that we were below projections. The one that was a real anomaly was in 2016 and 17, where we got 83 more students than NESDEC had been projecting. That was when Matt and I met with the person who's doing these projections for us to say, you've got to make an adjustment based on these new developments that are coming into town, because that we think that there's not a factor for the number of new units that are going in. As they've made that adjustment, and we're going to talk about those new neighborhoods in a moment, we've gotten back to closer actuals compared to projected, but they're above. We're not seeing the below anymore. We're seeing 3 years in a row of above, with the middle year being only slightly. This is just where we are in the last 5 years in terms of overall enrollment. So I told you that 4,018 is the key number for where we are on October 1st. You compare that to our 2014 number, we were at 4,254. So a little over, 236 students that are less in that amount of time, which is about 5.5% of a decrease. Again, that is a little bit from upper elementary and now middle school, where you're seeing that decrease. Henry James alone would have had, in 2014, Henry James would have had over 700 students, and now it's just over 600 students in just that time frame. So one of the things that I've been saying as we reviewed this with Cabinet is that, as we've talked about, well, the bubble of lower enrollment has kind of worked its way through the elementary, and we've been saying that for a couple of years now. Now I think the bubble has worked its way through Henry James. And we will see some more modest decreases at Henry James, but the big decrease is kind of over in terms of where Henry James is going to be somewhere above or below 600 students for the foreseeable future. This one is a lot of data, honestly, but it's only to demonstrate this point. If you started 2002, 2003, when it was 2,732 students, and follow 15 years down, every one of those next numbers is lower than the year before. 15 straight years. Last year was a match, 1976 and 1976. But with 1,989, it's the first time in 15 years that elementary enrollment, maybe by only 13 students, but the trend line shifted. And I think that was a pretty significant thing to show the board that it's been that long since elementary started to creep upward again. I also think it will continue to creep upward as more of these new developments come online and more units are available in Simsbury. Our K-12 enrollment of 4,018 does not include pre-K, but it would be important to note that there are 101 students in the preschool that we're operating. They don't count toward the state number. 101 is, some of those are full-time students, some of those are part-time morning, part-time afternoon. There's all sorts of combinations to allow families to accommodate a preschool arrangement that works for them. So 4,119 total students, but the number that will report to the state is that top one. It's important to note, we always note the largest and smallest cohorts. So when you say, where are your largest cohorts, it's at your terminal grades. It's at 12th grade and then 11th grade. So large cohorts are going to go out of the high school. So we will continue to see a enrollment decline, but it will be only at the high school. You won't see it anymore at the elementary and middle school, but the high school over the next 4 years is going to drop significantly because you're going to see classes of 377 and then 364 going out and classes of only 300 coming in. So that's something that we have really got to be paying attention to during budget season.
On the open choice number, which was 167, as I recall, I think 2 budget years ago, or maybe it was only 1, we made a decision to increase our commitment.
So, next slide,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Frank. And the smallest cohorts, despite the large kindergarten that we got in, it's one of the 2 smallest cohorts out of the K-12, with that third grade has for, since it's come in, it's been a very small cohort, and it remains the smallest at 249, but then kindergarten at 268. Later in the presentation, I think one of the things we have to pay attention to again is the kindergarten to first grade jump, because we actually saw a little different trend this year in that I'll get to in a moment. So I will transition on the open choice students, since Mr. Frank has already invited me to do that, and show you this slide, which is where our open choice enrollment is. So we started preschool open choice in 2013-14, and we are now comfortable with the number. We have been for the last few years trying to get exactly 12 students in preschool, and this was the first year we've been able to fill all 12 open choice preschool seats. So Nikki Mahan was very excited about that. The other number, when we made the decision that we were as a charter district for this program some 52 years ago, when we started our commitment to open choice. But by the time we were looking at it a few years ago, we were at a threshold in the above like 3.5%. It was 3.6%, and the board talked about the commitment of getting to a 4% and certain state funding that comes with that. So last year was the first year we hit the 4% threshold. So it was just one budget season ago. We were talking about it 2 years ago, but it was 1 year ago that we reached the 4% threshold when we had 165 students and a 4,039. I should say that. While you don't count preschool students in your overall enrollment, for purposes of your open choice enrollment, you do get to count them. So there is a little bit of a different factor in the way that gets counted. So this, we had really a similar number, 167 open choice students pre-K through 12 this year. The board may remember me saying that it was going to take a push to get to 4%, but that once we got to 4%, it would be easier to maintain. This slide makes it look like it was very easy to maintain. I can tell you there was a lot of work behind the scenes. We had more student withdrawals than expected, which required us to fill seats through the lottery. Probably upwards of 20 seats so those are different students in in a larger percentage. It happens for a variety of reasons. Families, some of them stay in the open choice lottery seeking a magnet school placement in Hartford, and they want a seat, and some get that magnet school placement and decide that that's closer to their neighborhood and they want their student in that. And many people who live in Hartford and are sending their students through the open choice program then become upwardly mobile to some of the suburbs in the next ring outside of Hartford. So we see a lot of families who buy in Bloomfield and East Hartford and Windsor, and they're no longer eligible for the open choice program. And they're now attending school in those districts. And that's what happened. And we were able to fill those seats with new students, but it was a bit of a process over the course of the summer.
So we're at 4% now. Is there a maximum beyond which we cannot go?
In terms of, well, it's based on this, where you have open seats, certainly, but in terms of the funding, the highest threshold of funding is at 4%. And there's no, if you have above 4%, there's not going to be any further increase in the funding per student.
Just one last question.
Sure.
Do we have a sense for how our percentage of open choice students compares to other schools in our DART or in the Farmington Valley?
Yeah, there's a handful that have a 4% threshold. I would say we are by far the largest district that has 4%. Many of the other smaller districts that are maybe 2,000 total students have been able to get to that 4% threshold more easily. But
The largest number of students.
We do.
I think West Hartford may have more students, but nowhere near 4% of their population. So, but they may have a few more than 167 students, but given the size of West Hartford overall,
Yep.
it's not 4%.
Thank you.
The report that you get, for the exhibit that you get from me, also includes information about magnet schools and out-of-district programs, so I'll start with the magnet schools. We had 143 students at full-time magnet schools who live in Simsbury but choose to attend a magnet school in another town. That number is exactly the same. It was 143 last year, and it's 143 this year. And as has been typical, about half of those students are in pre-K and K programs. Interestingly, if you take a close look at your exhibit, Wintonberry Early Magnet, which has been a popular destination for our Simsbury families, we have something like 33 students this year in the pre-K program, but not a single kindergarten student in the Wintonberry Early Magnet, which is just an interesting note because we have had kindergarten students over the last several years. So again, these students do not count in the 4,018 October 1 number, but they do need to be reported to the state. And then, in addition, the exhibit includes information about part-time magnet and out-of-district programs. This would include things like the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts, the Greater Hartford Academy of Math and Science, and things like the Bristol Tech School. So there are 9 students in those programs, and they are programs mostly where the student attends Simsbury High classes in the morning, goes to that other placement in the afternoon, so they do count in our 4,018.
What is our cost for those students going to magnets?
There is no cost for.
We don't have to transport them or anything?
We have to transport, but there's no.
But we
there's
do,
no
but we pay for
additional-
transportation?
Yeah.
Well, there's
Well,
there's tuition
Tuition
costs.
costs,
And
but
there's tuition
not,
costs.
but not
So,
transportation.
couple 100,000.
Okay, so it's one or the other.
Yes, it's about
Two-
200,000, and
25?
generally
For all of
tuitions
them.
are about 4,000 per student.
Yeah.
So that ballpark.
All right, this one, I want to point you to a matching document that was in your folder. So, because I think it's just, the one in your folder has a little bit more information. So, as the board knows, and certainly the Facilities and Enrollment Task Force, we got to a more systematic way of looking at all the new developments in town. So everybody started talking about the apartments going up here and the apartments going up there, and we said, we've got to really start to track this and how many students they're generating. So what we are tracking now is about 8 developments ranging from, the oldest of these that went up is probably the apartments in the Mill Pond, Mill Commons apartments near the high school. And Dorset Crossing probably started to go up about 5 years ago. So what you'll see is that these various developments are in different stages of their history. Carson Way is the first one on the list. 74 proposed units, 31 of those are actually built, and 28 are occupied, but we're seeing very few students out of that particular development. The next two, which are apartment complexes, Highcroft, which is further down off of Stratton Brook Road, 224 apartments planned, and as the note on your sheet will say, all of those 224 will be finished in the next 6 months. That's been a buildup over the last few years, and right now, with 154 occupied, we're seeing 12 students out of those apartments.
I was there last week, and there are a lot of strollers.
Are there really?
There are a lot of people with strollers.
Yeah.
So we'll see if they move out before they come to school or not, who knows, but.
And as the sheet denotes too, in addition to that 224, at Highcroft, they're going to build 48 townhomes, so that number's going to be 48 up from there, starting in 2019. That's the last phase of their development.
So the townhomes are non-apartments, so 48 more apartments plus 48 townhomes.
Correct. 48 more apartments that are really going to be done soon.
Okay,
Yeah, they're going to be occupied by spring, they believe.
okay,
But the 48 townhomes are kind of another year away.
okay.
Mill Commons, which is built out at this point and showing, pretty good occupancy, is generating 12 students. Mill Pond Crossing so Mill Commons went up, and then they sort of snuck the condos in behind Millwright's restaurant. So that was 20 more units of condos. Mill Commons is apartments, Mill Pond Crossing is condos. Right now, just a handful of students that we're seeing out of that one. Dorset Crossing, which is been fully occupied for a while now, and they have a very good occupancy rate with 158 of their 168 filled. 24 students is more than we've seen. We've been between 15 and 20, and now we're seeing 24 students there. The then two smaller. Talk about the other Squadron Line one. Cambridge Crossing, which is the property behind the skating center. And I invite you, the next time you're in the north end of town, pull into the skating center and go to the back lot, because you're going to see homes already up at Cambridge Crossing.
There's another one up.
So
I went today.
they are,
Interesting, they're going up
yeah,
quick, yeah.
you don't see them from the road, but you have to go to the back parking lot of the skating center to see them. And they will be moving people in as early as April. So they're planning 21 homes in this first phase, not built yet. They already have 6 under contract, and they're expecting more to go soon.
Homes or apartments?
Homes.
They're homes.
Yeah.
I thought they were
Yeah.
apartments.
Yeah.
A little smaller.
So
That's good.
one of the things I know the board will remember, we've talked about the fact that Dorset Crossing is actually zoned for Terriffill, but we made a decision when it went up, not knowing how many students it would generate, to move it to Squadron, that has more flexibility. Terriffill could manage those 24 students, quite frankly, given their class sizes. So I think there's an important discussion that we're going to need to have over the next 4 years. As Cambridge Crossing comes online, is it time to move Dorset Crossing back over to Terriffill, where it, by the map, rightfully belongs? And that's, I think, something that we're going to need to talk about. Because that number of 0 at Cambridge Crossing is going to be one that goes up quickly. Kings Ridge is a very small player in this, in that it's 24 apartments kind of behind the Dunkin' Donuts in the south end of town, and not generating very many students for us at this point. And then the new player in town in the south end is Aspen Green, which is, this is, when I talked to the folks there last week, it was pretty stunning to me. So you can see 121 built. One of the ones that they've built, they're just keeping open for showings to show people, so they never have any attention. So of the 120 that they intend to have filled, every single one of them is filled. And right now, generating 27 students for us. 17 of those being elementary school students at Latimer Lane. Okay? So take that factor, the next 60 to get up to 181, 30 more are going to be open in December, and the last 30 are going to be open in March. So if those fill as quickly as these did, you're looking at a number that's going to go from 27 maybe to close to 40. And then that is not counting the big player at the end of the list here, the Ridge at Talcott Mountain, which is the old Hartford property. And you can see 280 units planned there. We're hearing occupancy by as early as spring of 2019.
And that's the one that's going up across from Farmington Valley Racket?
Exactly,
Quickly.
exactly, and
Yeah,
very
really
quickly.
I had, someone had told me that was all assisted living. There's only a portion of
One-
that.
One
About,
portion.
the number that I got,
Going to the left.
That's supposed to be like a village, and it's gonna be, a whole little village right there.
I thought the village was supposed to be where the actual Hartford corporate office was.
That's where it is.
Okay, so there's no village going back where the Hartford was, or is that?
Not
Not at this point.
that's a different phase of the project, if this, so what this is 100, that 280 comes from 156 apartments and 144 townhomes. And plus 110 people who could be in an assisted living complex. And about 100,000 square foot of retail is what I understand.
Yeah.
So it's really quite a complex. And they actually have a website now where you can go on and look at floor plans, and so a lot's happened in the last little bit of time. So that's where we are on the new developments. It's a really interesting thing to follow, and I'm going to give you an update every 6 months on this. I call on October 1st, and I call on March 1st. Is that right? Is that 6?
Yes.
Yes.
Have
So,
those numbers jumped a lot in the last 6 months?
yeah, I can tell you that when I don't know about 6 months ago, I could get you that information. 1 year ago, right now, if you add all of this up, it's 89 students.
Yep.
1 year ago, we had 57 students coming out of these apartments. And they're not all apartments and homes. So it went from 57 on 10/1/17 to 89 on 10/1/18.
And it will be interesting. I mean, NESDEC will provide us new projections this year. We do that on an annual basis. But as we head into this study on facilities to potentially have a new demographer, take a look at all this data as well will be a significant
Helpful.
part of what we're heading into. Yeah, it's really interesting.
So that's the enrollment part, and I'm going to pause there and see what other questions anybody has.
Can I see a quick question? On the projected versus actuals? The other dip that you didn't mention was the dip at Central. It went down 17. Just didn't know if we thought something was going on there.
No, I don't really have great insight into what was going on there. Just some general move-outs of families, and often a few families with 3 kids can move, and there you are. You know, you kind of get the dip that you.
Sure.
So, but I don't have a real explanation on it. All right, part 2 of this, so that's enrollment. Now we're going to look at class size. I'm going to do the elementary piece, and then I'm going to turn to my colleagues who build schedules at the middle school and high school and do the work that nobody else wants to do in building schedules. Yeah, we'll do it in a second here. So at the elementary level, to look at class size first, just to orient you to the chart, you can see where we were last year with average class size at the primary and upper elementary. Each of those numbers is down slightly, from 19.9 at primary to 19.1. And then 21 for grades 3 through 6 was almost exactly the same at 20.9. What I want to remind the board, all 3 of these reports, elementary, middle, and high school, you need to remember that we made an important change to class size policy when we did our policy series last spring. And what that was, we had used guidelines in the past of K2 we used an appropriate range of 18 to 22. And quite frankly, it was a narrow range at the very top of what was acceptable. And what we did with class size is expand the range a little bit. So what used to be 18 to 22 at primary, we made 16 to 22, because quite frankly, there were all those in-between numbers where you couldn't make a choice and make it fit within the policy. So we expanded that range a little bit, and at the grade 3 through 6, and then you'll see it when it shifts to middle school and high school, when we were looking at 21 to 25, we expanded the appropriate range to 18 to 25 by policy. So a lot of the numbers that you're going to see in those below the range are directly an impact of us changing the policy. And because we aren't quite making an apples-to-apples comparison based on that policy change. So one of the things that you'll see, we actually have 3 more elementary classrooms than last year. Those are the 3 kindergartens we added. At budget time, we were trying to do exactly 96 that we had the year before, and we had to add 3. But 5 more at the primary and 2 fewer at the upper grades. In terms of classes that are above class size range, while we had a number last year that was not really comfortable for the board, when we had 10 over, this year we've moved that back to 4. By adding those kindergarten classrooms, obviously. The 3 that are above at grades K through 2, I can tell you where that is. It's Squadron Line, 2nd grade, where your policy says the upper part of the range is 22, and we have 3 classes of 23 in 2nd grade at Squadron Line. And the 1 class in grades 3 through 6 that is above is a 4th grade class at Tooten Hills that has 26 students. So those are the ones that are 1 above the range. And then in terms of the number below the range, by broadening that the window in which we said what's acceptable, you can see a significant drop that we only have 7 below the new class size policy range. If we had used the old number, it actually would have been it still would have gone down. It would have been 31 if we had used the range that used to be in your policy, but I want to start reporting it this way because I think it's important to reflect that. Couple of other notes on elementary. One part, as I was reviewing the class size policy, we actually don't talk a whole lot about the very first statement in the class size policy for the board, which says that each elementary school shall have a minimum ratio of 20 to 1 when it, as it plans. That's the first statement before it gets to the ranges. And what I wanted to do is say, well, how do we do in compared to 20 to 1? We do pretty well. When you see 3 of the schools are at 20.4, 20.8, and 20.6 to 1 in terms of ratio of teacher to student. Central School is essentially right at 20, and it's only Terriffill School with only 2 at each grade where you can't gather that efficiency to when you have a number like 35 students in first grade, it's going to be below the number. And then this is looking at an important number that NESDEC looks at. This is, in 1 year in kindergarten, how many first graders do you get the next year? So the left side of the column is kindergarten in the years over time. The corresponding one on the right side is what it turned into first grade. So I point to that because you can see our 258 kindergartners last year turned into 283 first graders. And that is that number of 25 more in the cohort. We thought we had regulated in that teen range once we went to full day kindergarten. So the last few years, we thought there was a very small bump up to first grade, but what we can see is that we hit a bigger number. That we have to keep an eye on, because what I can tell you, when I go back to this slide at primary, and I show you there are 39 classrooms in K2 last year, but 44 this year, that's 3 kindergarten classrooms that we added and 2 first grade classes that we added.
Right.
So it's all kindergarten and first grade that's happening. So, again, I find that interesting. Thank you for indulging me.
Highly engaged in this work.
And we are going to shift to the middle schools portion of this. I'm going to invite Anjanette Belmonte to the table because she is the builder of the Henry James schedule.
Yes, she is. Hi, everyone.
Thank you
How
very
are
much for
you?
doing that.
I love it. You got it. It's fun. I feel like I'm getting better at it every year. So in putting together the report, you can see that with the number of classes, we certainly have a reduction in your core classes, through your arts, through your unified arts, and especially in your physical education. This year, we were able to offer more of our wellness concept, which is where you have an individual teacher who sees cohorts of kids and provides them with health as well as physical education. So that was something new to our schedule, and therefore we were able to cut the amount of sections that we offered to our teachers. And down the road, that is something we want to look at more closely and see if that's possible to continue with that practice. And we would certainly look at teacher certifications to be able to do that. We also, as you saw, as the projection showed us, that we did lose approximately 48 students, so the number of sections obviously went down. For the number of classes exceeding the range, we were consistent with last year overall. We have 9 classes that do exceed. Some of them fall within the math realm and others fall within that wellness concept. And that just comes down to the build in 7th grade, where we have 2 teams of teachers teaching a full load and then a partial team of 0.6, and just trying to balance how many classes do each of those math teachers have and where do the students fit best. So we were a tiny bit high in math, but ultimately in wellness. And that's been a little bit of a change for our wellness teachers over the last 2 years, because those classes really, to me, also fit the category of core classes. I mean, they're hearty 25, 26 students in each class getting their education, very comparable to what it looks like in an English class or a social studies class. So that's been different for them, but it is working out really nice. And then also for the classes that are below range, again, because of that board policy expanding, we do have a significant drop in the number of classes that are below range. And I can just give a little praise to the staff who work on the balancing. Donna Stumper has done a tremendous job this summer. We really look at all of the class sizes and we do our best to balance and make sure that everything looks great. And when we look at student needs and the electives that they choose, we fill in all of those core classes first. And sometimes it's those unified arts and those wellness classes that we're kind of filling in puzzle pieces. So that's where we'll see the overages and sometimes the classes that fall below. But really nice numbers overall. And that's kind of where we expect it to be. And that's where we are.
Questions for Anjanette about the middle school piece?
Looks good.
Great.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions?
All right.
Nicely done.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you very much.
You got
Bring
it.
us
Thank
home,
you.
Mr. Para.
So, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory when you look up there. We didn't have really too many, I have something in my pencil, but we don't have too many major changes from where we were last year to where we were this year. We're actually extremely steady when you look at the number of classes from 367 to 370, et cetera, all the way down. We had an increase in family and consumer science. That was with an increase. We had a decrease because we didn't replace the teacher who retired, who ran the program. We wanted to find the right person. We believe we found the right person and increased his FTE, which can account for that shift. And in phys ed, that's where we went down and ended up, we always are shifting with the middle school in terms of where our FTEs land in which we do that. In our number of classes that exceed, you can see we've gone down quite a bit with that. Part of that is tied into the shift, but not a significant part is tied into how we do the accounting, because the exceed number, we didn't change that much. And the number of classes that are below went down as well. One of the factors, though, one of the things I want to talk about is that this is a snapshot. Like whatever day you pick, it's not going to shift dramatically from this, but it would shift on any day. It would shift, not dramatically, but you'd see some number shifts. We just started, this was our first add drop period, was this week, where students can come in and make changes, and that would change some of these numbers overall. Why it would change that really is not necessarily, except for in one case, it's not necessarily all the classes are filled and the numbers go over. It's we try to accommodate the student's schedule as best that we can. So even if I have a class of 14 and a class of 25 or 24, let's say, and if 24 matches better for the student, I might have to shift 3 classes to put them in the smaller class. We tend to make that decision, in which we do that. And that lends it to that the high school, I think any schedule is pretty complex. In building the high school schedule, to give you some sort of perspective here, this year, this is my 3rd build. I'm getting better at it. I really enjoy it quite a bit, actually. And what really drives the schedule a lot is we refer to as singletons, a class that only runs once, and that's it. And that, if I gave you the list of singletons, I think you'd hold it up and say, this is what makes us great. This is who Simsbury is. Because those classes range from AP seminar, a lot of the AP language classes, a lot of our AP classes in general, the higher level ones, to our construction classes, to our jewelry classes, to just pretty much that runs the gamut of classes that we offer for students that makes us kind of the school that we are. So on the one hand, I love that. On the other hand, it makes my life more difficult because we have approximately, at my guess, when I added them up, 64 singleton classes. So if you look at 8 periods a day, if we averaged it out, you're averaging about 8 classes that only meet once during one particular period. And then we have doubletons, they only have 2 that those classes meet. We have about 45 of those. So about 14 classes every period meet once or twice. And I have a great team behind me that I work with. I have Kathy McElveen, who's in the office right next to me. Cindy Heffernan is phenomenal, and the guidance counselor, Greg Stillman, works closely with me, has a great mind. We found a program to look at, all right, of all the singletons, how many of them have kids that take these classes? And we look at, we have it on a plain board we start with, we go through each period, and I'll say, hey, AP Calc, period 1. All right, what other kids are taking Calc BC? What singletons do they have? And we try to find a different period. And we really build from there, and it begins to get very layered and complex, and that's just the beginning of that. And that's what we do, and that's what we try to do, and we build a schedule to accommodate as many people as we can. I think we're pretty successful at it. This year in particular, I think it worked out very well. Guidance counselors were happy with that as they're making schedule changes. It's interesting, I don't know if you do puzzles or things, that if you do a well-designed puzzle, you can't articulate what the logic is, but you can feel it as you work with it. Schedule is very similar to that, and it really feels that way this year. These numbers, when they came up, I worked closely with Mr. O'Brien and with Mr. Sullivan to look at the classes that are under, look at the classes that are over, to see kind of, is it human error? Is it like, what caused these to happen? And we are very happy when we look through. If you have questions, I don't know how much details you get, but we can talk pretty extensively about purposeful decisions that we made that led to what it is. I mean, I want to build the ultimate schedule. I'm very much a competitor, and I'm going to work hard to get to the ultimate schedule. And I don't know what those numbers will be. I know they won't be 0. That's impossible.
Well, and my question is, I'm sure you can, the 44 that are over in the core classes
Yeah.
are not over by very much,
No.
I'm assuming. They're like 1 or 2?
We have about 10 classes that are over 25. We have 2 or 3 classes that are 28. Those are pretty high-level classes of kids who are going to go to lecture halls pretty soon that are going to have 200 in them. So the ones that are very high are, a high Latin class. All the Latin classes are actually very, very high. So we're pretty
some of the
comfortable with
honors
that.
math
Some of the
classes.
honors math classes, those are the ones that fit into
But
it
in
the
general,
most.
yeah, so people are seeing a big number, but honestly, it's 1 or 2 classes for most
Absolutely.
students. And
Absolutely.
it's only by 1 or 2 kids.
Right, and,
Right.
and one of the things that I've always made a point, when I was the one presenting that report, is when you have a large class at a high school, you only have that one period of the day, unlike a large class at elementary where all day long we have 26 kids in this class. You might have a large math class and then go to perfectly appropriately sized social studies, world language, and
Most of the ones that are over are level 2 and 3, because the
number
max
is a little lower.
I mean, is that the right max to still have for those levels? And I also wonder if, are we seeing more students going from level 1s to level 2, or is it the other way around?
In terms of the add drop period, or
Just kind of trends over time?
trends over time, people pretty much stay on the path that they are, but if there is a change, it generally is, it's more of a drop down a level. We certainly have some kids that go up, but statistically, it's significantly more the students that drop from a level 1 to a level 2. What ultimately usually happens is you have to start to make choices. Basically, junior or senior year, it's pretty hard to, you go from sophomore year where pretty much, you have level 1s, but you have the AP bio, and then all of a sudden, junior year, those APs expand, and you say, hey, I'm only going to take 1 or 2 here, and I'm going to go from there. But in terms of, I forget what you were saying the first part, Todd, about the ones that are over for level 2, level 3.
Yeah, well, English, there's one of the English that has 11.
Grade 12.
That is grade 12.
Yeah.
That's a purposeful decision where we really looked at the FTE and tried to make the 9th grade level 2s smaller, and the 12th grade, these kids have known the system, and they're used to. I don't think there's any, in fact, there aren't any classes over 26. 25 is where most of those
They
are
also
at.
know the teachers. Most of them have had the teachers before.
Yep.
Throughout the 3 years prior.
Yes.
So that initiation period is,
Right.
they can start right away.
Right.
Is it tough on the teachers, too?
Yeah, they'd love to have smaller classes and fewer kids, there's no question about that. But I look pretty closely at a teacher's load and as best I can. If I know that, you talk about 12th grade English, Mr. Madonna has 25, we're going to look at his other classes to make sure that they're not, as best that we can, I can't guarantee that, but
Right.
it is something we look at and try to take into account.
Anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I do. This is really good. I'm looking at the pages 14, 15, and 16 that shows a detail by,
Yeah, by class you have.
course.
Yeah.
But page 17, the earlier ones are organized by science, social studies, English, math,
Yeah.
world language. And then page 17, it's got art, business, family, and consumer
Okay.
science, and
Yeah.
so forth, but not individual classes.
Yeah.
How do the individual classes look in terms of max and min for those areas?
They're pretty good. Why we don't have a lot of those is art. You might have, in one case, 4 classes meeting at the same time, so it's hard to. It's like an AP drawing mixed in with a drawing 2 mixed in. So we make sure that number of kids in the classroom is 12 to 15 versus it being 1 or 2. But overall, the numbers are actually very good. If you look at the average class size, but the average class size, again, isn't, I think it can be deceptive, like music, for example. You can go from an ensemble that has fewer than 15 to the next period that has 78 kids, if it's a chorus or something of that nature.
Oh.
So it's hard that the average doesn't really reflect the reality of.
No, it doesn't. That's
This.
why it kind of would be interesting to see the individual classes listed here. Is there some reason why they aren't?
I think because it just,
we've
I mean-
we've done it before. We could certainly provide that information. It's a really complex picture because of the fact that in a number of these places, there are multiple classes meeting with, so they might have ceramics meeting with a sculpture class, and Dave Holzman, who's a master teacher, can do 2 things at once. He's got these kids working over here, and there's 8 of them, and he's got 7 kids working over here, so we would not run a separate class of 8 and 7, but those kids together of 15 can work. And so if we listed out all of the individual classes, it might be a little deceiving.
So it's a different methodology of course as opposed to a core class where you,
the unscientific
structure of
methodology that
forecast.
we use when I call Neil to figure this out is the period and how many butts are in the seat, basically, during that period. So how many students are
And is
in
it safe?
period one? And is it like for Miss Sisiat, the art teacher, how many people are in her period one class? It might be 2 or 3 different classes combined, like if we said we listed, it might say 5, 5, 5, but overall there are 15 students in there. And then usually there's even a few more because we throw independent study kids in there as well.
So on that average, on that sheet you're pointing to, Tom, on page 17, that will tell you about how many students are in each period. About,
The average
1, 2,
number.
3, 4, 5, 6 columns over from where the numbers start.
I understand this because my daughter's in an art class this way. So there's an art class going on, and she's taking a different course in the same room. And so she works, it's more of an independent, and so they're all in the room together, so she
The
still
only
has
reason I'm
access.
raising the question is that I've heard some pushback from various sources
Yeah.
about small classes.
Oh,
And there's a reason for small classes based on the kinds of things that you're saying. So, I mean, it's helpful
Yeah.
to get this explanation.
Right.
And if
True.
you,
There's-
I mean, that number of the fewest number of kids in the class is an accurate number of that time period. So in art, the smallest class has 9 students in it. Family Consumer Science, which is the smallest, is 7, and that's a purposeful attempt to build a program that we had that was phenomenal, but that when the teacher retired, we lost something, and we're trying to build it back up. And that 7 is students are kind of taking that as a track, as a career track, and we're trying to build that number up. But that
Those
number
students
is
were
pretty
great.
accurate.
Excuse me to interrupt, but they, at open house, they were there serving, and it was really great to see.
Right, right.
And they had made the food for open house. It was really nice to stop in the cafeteria and see them.
Tom, I would also point out in some of these areas where you see small classes.
Yeah.
These are the classes where there are legitimate safety concerns.
Yes.
In tech ed and art.
Cooking.
And cooking. In cooking, we really can't put more than 18 in a room. In art, some of it is safety, some of it is just, I mean, you're doing ceramics and sculpture, you're talking about throwing wheels and kilns, and
Yeah.
there's a lot going on in those rooms. And unlike a class where it is a little more stationary, and we could say 25 students in that class, you can't have that in a tech ed class, in an art class. There just are safety concerns that we would not allow.
And we don't,
Well,
when
the
we-
business, that wouldn't apply to I mean, the number in businesses, that's a pretty small
Which is
number.
why you see a higher number there. The business classes are running at 22.4 on average.
in the, right, in the 11 number you see there is we run a senior elective, that's a quarter elective, it's a quarter course, and so sometimes that course can hit a period there, that number's pretty low. But other than that, actually, we had very high numbers for business electives in terms of when we originally had the numbers that we had of when the
It's
kids signed up
grown.
for
So
classes.
these minimum numbers would be very strange, unusual
Those are the, yeah, it's
situations.
definitely not an average. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Does that answer? Anybody have anything else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again,
Excellent
to
data.
take all the information in your whole wall of stuff and do
Yeah,
this,
that's
it's
right.
pretty
That's right.
impressive.
Just imagining a lot of sticky
Yeah, we know what your room looks like.
Stop by, yeah.
Thank you very, very
Kara
much.
wins the prize for getting the most questions. That's good. So, as those of you who have been on the board a long time know, that what we will do with this information, now that it's been presented to you, is we will turn it around and send it back to NESDEC. And then I'll be back probably six weeks from now, showing you our next set of projections, which is the lead into budget season. So you'll see some of these numbers again in about 6 weeks after they run the methodology on how they do projections. So that's
Thank
it
you
for
very
tonight.
much. That's an awful
Thank
lot
you.
of great
Great
information
job.
that we will
Nicely
take
done.
home with us. It's time for public audience. And seeing none, I will remind you all that we have a strategic planning meeting workshop on October 16th at 5:30 at the Simsbury High School, room D172. And our next board meeting is Tuesday, October 23rd, here. And that's all I have for today.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you very much. Second, anybody? Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? Excellent. Thank you.